Hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday. For us over here, this is kind of the second last Friday before Ireland, so things are starting to get heated up and fairly intense. So this is our last group conference call for the responsible leather stakeholders before Ireland, and it'll probably be about an hour. So hopefully we can. And what I really want to do is have some good discussion in here. So our usual, the copyright, the Chatham House Rule, and the Antitrust Declaration are in effect, as they are with all of our meetings. And this is a GoToWebinar. So you can either use the chat or the questions box. And what I will ask you to do is if you could just in that box, just introduce yourself, if you can give your name and your company so that everybody can see who's on the call. And when you do, if you do unmute yourself and speak, then we can certainly, we can do that, and please just announce your name. So if you do want to speak, just raise your hand and we can unmute you, and otherwise we'll just keep going through. So we will take the notes from this meeting and pass them back to you shortly after, and there will be a recording as well. So it's a very quick agenda. I'm going to give you actually this agenda is not quite complete. I've added one more thing. I'll give you a quick update on an event I was just recently at, and then we'll talk about the meeting in Ireland, and then I want to really have more of a discussion around how we're going to be working with GRSB and get some good feedback into that. So I'll just start quickly by saying I was just in Chicago. I flew back late last night, and I was speaking at the U.S. Hides, Skin, and Leather Association meeting and convention, and that was in conjunction with the Leather Industries of America. And it's basically the two of them were meeting and talking about joining together to just be a single entity. But I was not quite sure what to expect, but it was a fantastic event. We had Steve Sothman, who's been on our calls many, many times, and he really did a great setup and organized a great event. But we had some of the kind of key presentations was a really good trend analyst who had a lot of insights about where the future of leather is going. If there's any possibility of being able to share those slides or find a link to them, I will definitely share them with our group. I spoke on what we're doing with responsible leather and a lot of the drivers for that, and was very pleased. It was very, very well received. Many people came up and gave me their cards and thanked me, and a lot of people were taking photos of the event that is coming up in Ireland. So it'll be great to have that level of engagement from that group. And then the other thing that was quite interesting was John Clark of Prime Asia, but he was really speaking on behalf of Leather Naturally, which is kind of just about to become an actual entity, essentially another non-profit organization, but that is really focused on promoting leather globally. And they've been having a lot of pretty serious impacts. Leather and skin prices have been dropping. I'm sure as a brand, that's very good news. But for them, it's having really serious impacts on their bottom line. He said for every dollar in hide price, for every dollar that the price of a hide drops, the impact in the United States is $33 million. And they're actually close to $1 billion in losses over the last few years from the decreasing prices of hides. So they're really worried. They're worried that leather is starting to lose its position, particularly as a lot of the attacks come in terms of animal welfare, environmental impacts, and then there's an upsurge in a lot of the different alternatives. So it's interesting. He had quite a presentation. They've got a very hip marketing firm that is really helping them build a plan that will target the Gen Z or Z and the millennials. So basically, there was only one person in the whole room that would have qualified for that, and I can tell you it was not me. But yeah, they're using a lot of hype. They talked about subcultures and pop cultures, and you know, so many types of social media I'd never even heard of. So I think it's quite an aggressive campaign. They're looking to raise about $1.5 million. They will not focus on anything about where leather comes from. They're not going to focus on leather alternatives. They're not going to defend themselves as to why leather is good and why it's not bad. They're not going to talk about social or environmental sustainability. So in a way, it seems like we're not part of it. But on the other hand, we are, I think, a perfect match for them, because we really are the backup to the story. They're going to promote leather as a product, and we, through the responsible leather work, we can really provide the foundation behind all those good stories, and then the leather supply network will be what delivers that. And then there was one other actually quite entertaining presentation by a lawyer who is a trade lawyer, and he was talking about all the impacts of the tariffs down in the United States, and basically the tariff war that's happening between the US and China. And all I can say was I just felt very grateful to be a Canadian when I finished hearing that. The only conclusion he made is that there's no conclusion to be made, because nobody knows what Donald Trump's going to do next. So everybody's just trying to wait and see what happens and then react when they can. So, oh, it looks like my screen is not being shared. Is that?
We can see it.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and the introductions are not working. Okay. That is, if you guys are finding the chat function, I'm not sure if it appears for you, but those should be public. In terms of the introductions, we have Rebecca Zetterstrom from Volvo Cars, Tuan DeBee from the Pally Group, and we have Sherry Gittelman with New Balance, and that's who's introduced themselves so far. Oh, and John Stokes of New Balance as well. Thank you for that, Tuan. Okay. And everybody else, I encourage you to introduce yourselves. So we are really counting down the days to this event. Steffi and I actually fly out next weekend. So for us, we only have 1 week left before it really starts up. But if you have not registered and are planning to go, please do so as soon as possible. We're really starting to plan a lot of the logistics, and it'll be helpful for us to have everybody in there. And please do encourage any of your colleagues or anybody you talk to attend. All right, so I've been having a lot of discussions with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and they are extremely, obviously very generous in allowing us to combine our event with theirs, and also they've been very open and welcoming of working together. But then there's also that layer of nervousness, and I wanted to talk about that fairly openly on this call, just so that we really set the stage well for coming into Ireland and also any other interactions that may be happening. So I'm going to walk through how we fit together, and just try to get a little bit more advanced in our thinking on how we work with them, particularly on the animal welfare issues. Because the beef industry, and I've known this from the beginning, when you start talking at the producer level, the farmer level, there is some nervousness about a bunch of people who live in cities and work in offices coming in and telling them how they should be raising their animals. So I'm going to walk through this again. As we know, we share the same beginning of the supply chain. We've got the farms through the slaughterhouse, and then once the animal is processed through the slaughterhouse. The meat will go into either restaurants or retails and supermarkets, and then the skins will go into leather tanning, which goes to manufacturing, and then there's all of that. And there's other byproducts too. Had a long discussion with somebody yesterday about the importance of gelatin. So where we said, or the GRSB really owns this area, and they really own this area quite deeply. I mean, that's really probably where most of their activity is in terms of the change they're driving. We overlap in that we want to address all of the leather manufacturing right through to the source of the fibers, but of course, we have fairly little influence on that. So I've got a very big fat arrow on how the end of their supply chain has a lot of influence and knowledge on the beginning of the supply chain, and we're more of a small arrow. However, when you look at the impact and the kind of connection that we have with the consumers, particularly when you've got very big brands, like New Balance would be one of them, I think there's a very strong impact. You know, people are very brand conscious, and they listen very closely. And this might be a bit controversial, but I would hazard to say that at the food end of the market, there's not as much of a dialogue with the consumers. Very, very important, obviously, but you know, people are going to think much more carefully about how they spend $300 on a pair of leather boots than they are on $3 on a hamburger. But in the end, you know, the big thing that we have is we really share those same goals. And I think that's where we really want to be working together with them. So, you know, we've been talking a little bit about the animal welfare, and you've seen some of the work we've done so far around setting up an animal welfare framework and establishing a benchmark that in the end can be quite, you know, if we follow it through along the lines of what we've done for wool and down, that benchmark is going to be fairly high and fairly strict. So I don't think, I'm pretty sure that will not be well received by the stakeholders, the members of the supply chain down here. They've been working with the GRSB for years. It has been a long process to get them on board for what they're doing, and you know, we have to be sensitive to that. And the GRSB is very successful. They've had a lot of growth and even additional interest recently. In Ireland, they're going to formally announce the foundation of the European Roundtable. In Brazil, they've been there for a number of years. They also have Colombia, Paraguay, and Argentina that some of them are just coming on board. Canadian and the US are very well established, and the Canadian one is the only one that I know of that actually has a standard that addresses all of the principles of the GRSB, including animal welfare. There's South Africa, the Australian framework, and New Zealand programs are ones that are not, I don't think they're officially members of the GRSB, but they are in close discussion and alignment, and it's probably fairly likely that they'll get in there. And then the other one is there is some discussions happening in China. So it's a pretty comprehensive map. So when we look at what we're going to ask for in terms of animal welfare, we have to make some decisions. So we can set very strict expectations, a high benchmark, but our impact that we'll have is going to be narrow. Whereas if we kind of take a more relaxed approach, set some more practical expectations, a bit more flexibility, then we have that opportunity to have a really wide impact. And GRSB can deliver farms to us that sit along this whole spectrum. But I think if we take this approach, then we can absolutely get this broader range of impact. So when I look at how we have rolled out and been successful with our other standards, like wool and down, it's really been because we have had those really strong connections with the kind of the beginning of the supply chain. With down, we were working with the North Face and through them with a couple of major down suppliers that sourced right through to the farms, and they were truly partners with us. And likewise, there were some other supply chains that came to us early on through other outdoor brands. And because it's a fairly a narrow base of suppliers, we were able to get out and really drive the adoption quite rapidly. And then for wool, we had our secret weapon, which is Stuart Adams, who has been a sheep farmer in Australia for 30 odd years and worked in the wool industry for well over a dozen. And he has all of those connections. So he literally traveled around the world and met with every major wool producing group on this planet, talked to them as a farmer and as a representative of the standard, and was able to really build up that trust and engagement. And even for all of that, it's been very, very slow to get the RWS adopted, mostly because of the prices are so high. So, with leather, it's a different story. We do not have those connections. And even with the size and scale of the companies and brands that we're working with, farmers, when you think of what a farmer gets from leather, they get little or I'm sure in their minds, almost no value from the hides of their animals. And so while we can potentially offer them some financial value, particularly through the credit trading system, it'll take some time for the farmers to realize this. And to get there, it's just going to take enormous resources to reach out to the beef producer networks. And given the rate that we're being resourced right now, I think our chances of success are probably quite low. So what I am proposing is that as we move forward with our work on particularly in animal welfare, that we're really open to hearing what the GRSB is doing and trying to support their activities, even if it isn't as black and white a kind of a certification or verification that we're wanting. Now, I don't know, I've had some just brief discussions with them about what they're doing, and we're going to learn a lot more when we're in Ireland. But I just wanted to have a bit of a discussion with this group, and if you could speak as a brand, or I know I think we have a forepaws on here. Just speak from your position and let me know your thoughts. So I'm going to open it up. If you could raise your hand to share any comments, or just type in your comments and we'll read them. Oh, and we have Michelle Pollock from Lollipop Tree, Sue Irvine, hi Sue, from Tommy Hilfiger, and Zach from Timberland. For some reason, you guys don't have the chat function.
We have Michelle's hand is raised. It's been raised for a little. I don't know if she has a comment with this or something earlier. I don't know.
Okay, Michelle, you are unmuted. Ooh. I thought you were unmuted. Hang on. Sorry, Michelle. Well, your hand's down. We can hear you now. Michelle? Oh, okay, sorry. All right, you were just introducing yourself. I will unmute you. Okay, does anybody have any comments on that? I mean, on everything I've said, are people, even if you just want to put it into the questions box, just wanted to know before we go into Ireland, are there any strong feelings that we have to be at a really high level of a standard?
There are a few hands raised now, so I just
Okay.
muted Sarah, so you can speak now, Sarah.
Hi, Anne. Hi, everybody. It's Sarah Shields here from Humane Society International. And I wanted to point out, of course, I agree with everything that you've said there, Anne, but I'm a little bit worried about GRSB being a partner that will work with us constructively to move the ball forward. I mean, my experience so far has been that they're a little bit reluctant to have an open discussion about some of these animal welfare issues. So I just want to make sure that whatever we do with them, that we end up in a place where we're actually serving the needs of the brands and the animals, and that they don't hold us back from really moving, forward on these issues. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, very, very well heard. And one thing I didn't mention is that the GRSB has invited us to become a member of their organization. They've created a new sector, which is, I think, industry alliances, which we would qualify as. I think the dairy industry may fall in there, and potentially even soy and others. So we will have a voice, and I think it'll take a while to kind of get in there, establish ourselves as a credible, trustworthy relationship, and then we kind of go through, if I could say, the diplomatic channels, because it really does have to be a conversation. And I think if we can show ourselves willing to listen to them, hopefully they'll be willing to listen to us. But yes, very good point.
I just unmuted Hannah. So.
Hi everyone. It's Hannah from Fopos. Yeah, I was wondering if it's if we could think about like not mutually exclusive, like the strict expectation and the practical expectations. Because I like also referring to Sarah, I'm also a bit like worried if the efforts towards animal welfare and actually anything else would be limited by being too closely aligned to this kind of, as it seems, very powerful GRSB. That worries me a bit, where the ambition of the Responsible Leather Roundtable is then going towards. That's just a personal comment.
Yes. Okay, and that's actually, to that point, one of the thoughts I had. Again, this credit system is, I'm almost using as the solution to everything, but we could potentially have two levels of credits, and I don't know, that may end up being just too complicated, but we could put one level of credits for the practical expectations, and then we could give a higher level of recognition for the higher value credits. So again, it would be great to hear from the brands, their thoughts on whether we want to have those kind of almost a two-tier system, or if that's going to be too complicated.
I've unmuted Sherry, so you can speak from New Balance.
Hi, this is Sherry from New Balance, and thanks for your presentation. I think it's collaboration is the direction we're all working and thinking about, and I think we can always achieve more through collaboration, but it's being realistic that you've got different organizations who have different KPIs and end goals that they're trying to achieve. It doesn't mean that we don't go forward with collaboration, but I think what you're really hitting upon is just that trust building process, and that this is kind of the first step in doing that. And so when you come to the table, I think in that type of situation, what we want to do is look at all the things that we have that are in common, like what are those common goals, right? And I think if we can show a commitment to build off of that, it may just be a starting point. It doesn't mean that we can't move with them or move their industry further going forward. down the road. But that's only going to happen when you've built up that trust and you have that collaboration, that basis established. So I think, you know, they're going to be cautious, we're going to be cautious, but that's really that trust building step. And you don't want to not get to the collaboration by not taking the time to really identify what we have in common and build off of that. So I don't really have a comment about, I would always say stay away from complexity when you're looking at the two levels of credits. But I think things can evolve is what I'm saying. So maybe it starts at a lower place than where everyone would like to start, but what are we working towards? And we do that through building up a real basis for collaboration.
Great, very well put. And I think, you know, you've raised a good point in that the first thing we need to do, we know that our goals are very aligned. You know, we both state animal welfare in our goals. It's just more of what's the approach to ensuring that. And I think we need to get a better understanding of what they're doing. And they're actually working on collecting the information from their various roundtables on what their different approaches are. And I think they have now a reporting or some kind of an index that they're rolling out. And that'll be really, really helpful to us to see exactly where everybody's hitting these different points. And maybe that's going to be a good basis for us to work from and evaluate where we want to be. All right, any other comments?
There's a comment from Rebecca at Volvo in the question panel. It says that she's positive to a dialogue with the GRSB with the ambition of finding a common approach that can be practically applied in the beef supply chain. So another similar comment about finding common goals, I think.
Great.
Oh, and one more hand raised, so I'll unmute Zach.
Hi, Anne. I just wanted to say that I think everything you said definitely makes sense. I think we'll probably have much more of an opinion after the conference once we learn a little bit more. But just from what you've explained, I think for us, more flexibility would actually be better. The idea of like the two different like higher value credits, but yeah, I don't know much about like what the complexity of that would be or anything. So I think once we learn more, yeah, we'll be able to better say.
The other thing that could be possible is that, yeah, and I don't know what the reality is, but it may be that these higher end farms will be ones that brands can link to through a chain of custody or, you know, full traceability model. Because you know, in some of the discussions I've had, there's actually, you know, these pockets of really, you know, good examples of best practices on all levels of farming in terms of deforestation and animal welfare, and they're often really well connected through traceability. So that may be another area. So thanks, Zach.
Yeah, I think that'd make a lot of sense for us because what we're thinking about now is kind of having like these like pinnacle products and farms that we highlight with like real good traceability and chain of custody. But then we also want to be able to set like some kind of broader goal for all of the leather that we source. So having those two levels would make a lot of sense for us.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. The at the time that I was at the Hides and Skin event, there was another event happening or had just finished on the West Coast, and it was all around traceability in the beef supply chain and focused in the United States, of course. But it was interesting. The traceability is going to come, you know, in fits and starts in different parts of the world. But I think this is where that whole credit trading system makes sense. It allows everybody to address their whole supply chain in a more efficient way, and at the same time that the supply chains are organizing themselves to deliver that kind of traceability that you may ultimately want.
Antoine, he wants to speak up also. He's not able to, or he tried to raise his hand, but it's not visible.
Ah, poor Tuan. I don't know what your problem is, Tuan, or what our problem is. Ugh. Can you just simply type in? Oh, looks like you're there.
Ah, there I am. Yeah, I don't seem to have a very good relationship with this program over time, but I think you can hear me now. I had my hand raised for a long time,
Ah,
but it doesn't matter. It's because, well, first, well, my name is Twan de Bian from Pilot Group, Vitelco. It might be good to point out that we are a company that has farms, cattle, let's say, a slaughterhouse, and a tannery. So we are a bit in the whole chain. And first, I would like to compliment you on the slides you made to show us the discussion we have with GRSB. Um, I would like to say that last time when this guy from GRSB, what was his name again? Peter or
Rory.
something?
Rory. Yeah.
Yeah, when he was in the call, I was I don't know exactly what the word is. I was well, flabbergasted, I think, by the way he communicated in this call. It was I didn't know what I was hearing. It was well, for me it was unbelievable the way he came in. I think you know what I mean. I didn't say anything back then, and later when I started thinking about it, uh, I think I might understand a little bit why this is, because if we look at beef, we now also in this presentation we look at beef as one big sector we have to deal with, but actually there are a lot of different situations in this beef supply chain. For example, I look at it for myself. If you are somewhere in South America, for example, and you're breeding or you're fattening cows, and you might slaughter these cows, and they weigh around 270 kilograms, I would suppose. And I suppose that beef would bring up about around €3 for a farmer or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but it will not be far from the truth. Then this cow would bring up about €800. And if you look at today, I think a normal, not too very good cow skin would cost about €10 for straight from the slaughterhouse, so that we would be somewhere around 1% of the value of this cow. So if I look at that, I understand his reaction a little bit. It's we're for those farmers, we in leather, let's talk about leather. We're only a very small part of the whole business. Sorry. If you look at our company, we only do veal, so we only sell we only have calf leather. And if you look at the veal calf, we fatten these calves till up about 160 kilograms, and the farmer gets around €4, a little over €4 for this calf. So that's somewhere around 600, €640. And a good calf skin today, straight from the slaughterhouse, is worth around €90. So that's somewhere around 14% of the value of this calf. And every time we make this calculation over the last few years, we always end up somewhere between 12 and 18% of the value of the total calf is represented by the skin, by the hide. I hope this is not going too fast or for the rest of the listeners. But if you look at the picture you have on now, I think this has a big influence on the size of those arrows.
Mm.
So I think if you look at this, I really love the picture you have here. I don't agree totally on what you said about the influence on the consumers, because I think it will be like this in the future. But at this moment, I think a lot of people buying leather in whatever way, they don't even think about the leather is coming from an animal. So I think that arrow exactly is a little bit too big today, but that's my personal opinion. But more important is that I think the kind of beef you are in, or the kind of sector in, has a lot of influence of the size of this arrow on the way of the influence we have on the supply chain. Because if you look at, I think I talked about two ends of the supply chain, veal on one end and the small cow on the other end. But if you look at those differences, I think if you look at veal, we could have I think a very big influence on the supply chain. So if you go further to your next picture, I think even maybe one further with the influence, that one, yeah. I think, and I heard it before, luckily. I think we talked earlier about different grades or different levels or whatever you would like to call them. And I think if we would have different grades or different levels, we could determine pretty much the influence we have. Because you talk here about narrow impact and wide impact, and I think you mean as on how many animals or how far over the world we could have an impact by these words. But
Yep.
I think if you have strict expectations, your actual impact on, in this example, animal welfare, excuse me, could even be bigger than when you have a wide impact with, well, flexible approach. So impact, in my opinion, is not only about how many animals you can reach but it's also about what you can do for those animals. And I think eventually the brands and with the way they source and how much they will live up to the standard we are going to make, eventually they are going to determine how much impact we have. And it also could have an influence on value of hides, both on the hides that are within the brand or within the benchmark or that qualify, and on the hides that don't qualify. So I think it's very how do I say it? It's very dangerous to now look at the value of a hide today and say, well, maybe it's too hard for us to have an influence. I think it could also be a little bit the other way around. If we make a good standard with good expectations and maybe some levels, so we don't exclude people who cannot live up to it, but we can also give extra value to people who can live up to strict expectations. I think then that's the way that we can determine pretty much our own impact.
Oh, very, very well said. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but you had such a long introduction. There was like 10 things in your introduction I would like to respond on, but I don't remember them all anymore.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have that habit of talking a lot, but no, great feedback. I think you might be my rival now. So one question I'll actually put out to you then is, if we're looking at this high benchmark, strict expectations, do we think that this is going to bring farmers towards better practices, or are we simply going to recognize those farmers that are already doing best practices? Because if you recall, I had that kind of bell curve in our theory of change, where we define the best practices kind of at the end of the bell curve, where there's a smaller number, but where we are. But what we really want to do is drive everybody towards improving their treatment of animals, deforestation, etc. So, the more practical thing is the one that is more focused on continuous improvement and kind of walking people down that path towards better and better practices. And frankly, these are probably the area where there's more improvements needed. So, do you have any thoughts on that, or anyone else?
Yeah, if I can say, I think you're right, but I think if you look at the picture like you have it here, you would say the bottom arrow you have there, that's the practical expectation that we would call that level 1, or level silver or bronze or whatever you want to call it, and the top one, the strict expectation, we would call that level gold. Yeah, I think if you have level 1 practical expectations, then with that you would stimulate everyone who's below there to reach that level. And that means that I think that in that way it would improve animal welfare. But I also think that everyone who is already meeting those practical expectations could be stimulated to improve up to the strict expectation level. So I think if you make several levels, if you make only one level, there is always going to be a big group that can never live up to it, and there's always going to be a big group that's already above this level. So that's why I think if you make several levels, and I don't know if it has to be 2 or 3 or 4, I'm very for simplicity, so don't get me wrong, but I think if you make several levels, it's easier to stimulate all different kinds of groups or all different kinds of level of farmers or countries to make a step ahead. Do I make sense?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think you're touching up against that endless, well, there's a number of conflicting kind of ideas that we have to resolve when we develop these tools and these standards. Do we have high impact? Do we set a high standard with lower impact, or do we go more for scale and more flexible impact? And then the other one is, do we have a tool that really can reach the greatest number of people, but is more complex, or do we go more for simplicity? And I am absolutely stuck in between. I have no idea because I see so much merit in both approaches.
Yeah.
And simplicity can be such a powerful way, particularly for the brands who, I think want to have a fairly consistent message.
Yeah, but
Now,
I
having
really
said
think, and I have never made such a standard, so maybe I'm not allowed to speak about this in this way, but I really think that it's possible to make a few levels and still have a simple tool. It doesn't necessarily has to make it complicated, I think. But I understand your problem very well. So everyone who has an opinion about this better be in Ireland.
Exactly. And maybe some of the way we address this is we may have a tool that is, multiple tiers. And in the end, we are going to have a complicated message to deliver because we've got the work that's happening on animal welfare, the work on deforestation, and then the tanneries. And the way we're working with the tanneries is more going to be tied into a chain of custody system. So there's all sorts of levels of messaging that will be challenging to figure out how do we get that to be communicated by the brands. I think when you're doing it at a corporate level, you've got a lot of space and more people's times when you're talking about your CSR statements and activities to talk about it. When it comes down to on product communication, then it becomes, we're just going to have to wrap everything in that term responsible leather and then rely on, I guess, store staff and the website to get the message out. So I think that'll be a really important part of figuring out how do we go forward is what is it that the brands feel they need to be communicating to their consumers, and what do they want to do that they may or may not need to communicate but still meets with their CSR strategy.
Yeah,
If there's any brands who'd like to speak up, please go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Fawn.
Oh, sorry. I think eventually a brand is the one who makes the choice on what kind of material they source, and they also make a choice on how they sell it to their consumer. So I don't think, but let the brands speak out. I don't think they will necessarily do marketing with the responsible leather roundtable label or logo or something like that. So I think for them it should be important on what kind of level of responsible leather do we source, and they might even source different levels of responsible leather for different kinds of products that they are producing or selling. So for me that would even be an extra reason to have different levels so they can have a choice, and you will still be able to, for example, source hides that are maybe a little bit cheaper, but still okay on level 3 or bronze in the responsible leather tool or whatever.
Yep. Well, giving us lots to think about, that's for sure.
Sorry for that.
No, this is exactly where we need to be. I feel we're, yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to have a lot of time on in Ireland to talk about, but when we talk about the tool design, that's actually a good area for us to talk about the claims that we want to make. So that it'll be a great chance to get the brands in there and get their voices heard.
For me, it would be something that's very important to talk about, because I think it's a lot easier to discuss it in person for some time than on the calls like this. But maybe we can do it then at the bar at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's even better. I like your thinking. Okay, anybody else that would like to say a few words or tap them into your questions box? Thank you. We got a note from Susan, minimum benchmark level with a view to have continuous improvement. There had been a request for some information about GRSB and to find out more about what they're doing. And just so you know, it's the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, which is grsbeef.org. We can send that out in the notes as well. Okay. Well, that's basically it. That is the end of today's discussion. It is short and sweet, but it was a robust discussion. So thanks to everyone who participated or listened, shared your opinions. Anybody, any last comments? All right. Well, I hope to see many of you in Ireland. And one thing I want to say too, I've had a bit of feedback, and I think it's extremely valid, that these are scheduled meetings and task groups and responsible leather versus tool development and so on are a bit confusing, and I absolutely understand, because I get confused myself. So I just want to say that I'm committed, after Ireland and after our textile exchange conference in Milan, I want to sit down and just plan out a better strategy that will keep people informed and lots of opportunities for engagement, but not drive everybody crazy with multiple phone calls where I often end up repeating a lot of what we've done. So if you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to send them in. You can send them to Stephanie anonymously if you don't want to hurt my feelings. I'm not at all worried if you critique the way things have been going, but if you're more comfortable to do it that way, go ahead. So yeah, any feedback would be great. And otherwise, we will see you in Ireland. I have a whole bunch of really good cow jokes that I'll be sharing there. So that should be a good incentive. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And I wish you a great Friday and a fantastic weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anne. Looking forward to Ireland.
Yeah. See you there.
Yeah.
You too. Can't wait about those cow jokes.
They're good ones. They're actually really bad.